Hey everyone, so today I want to talk about how to get back into reading. Today, there are so many distractions that stop us from being able to focus and concentrate. Most of our media is very short form. If you look at like TikToks or YouTube Shorts or Instagram Reels, they're all less than 1 minute. Even go back to when you had Vines, which were literally 7-second videos. These are short forms of media that give us dopamine instantly. We only have to give a fraction or sliver of our time to receive all this joy surging into our brains. It's easy and quick, and it doesn't require deep concentration or greater focus. You look at all the other sort of social medias out there as well. It's all about picking up your phone and scrolling. You're just constantly scrolling. You're spending very little time looking at each piece of media, each post or whatever, but you're getting all this dopamine. Your brain registers this, it looks at something, and it fills up with dopamine. It's sort of this superficial happiness. So it's very difficult for us to focus and concentrate nowadays because we have all these easy ways of satisfying our minds. There's all these easy ways to get dopamine, but ultimately we find ourselves unfulfilled. You spend 3 hours scrolling through Instagram or 3 hours watching YouTube videos or TikToks or whatever, and once you get done, you're like, well, nothing has changed in my life. Now, maybe you're looking at educational TikToks or educational YouTube videos. That's great, but most of the time you're just looking at entertaining content. You're looking at stuff that isn't making your brain smarter. Basically, social media garbage, for lack of better words. It's very easy to go through that time not really realizing that the hours are ticking by. And like I said, eventually it's been 3 hours and you're like, well, I haven't got better at anything. I haven't improved my life in any way. I've just wasted 3 hours of my time. It's very difficult for us to concentrate and focus today because dopamine is so readily available. We have all these modes of hyperstimuli which give us this great, quick, instant gratification, this superficial happiness that temporarily satisfies us, but in the long term leaves us incomplete, leaves us empty. And that's why I think it's really important to be able to have the concentration and focus to read. And when you're reading, especially if you're reading educational material, you're learning, you're challenging your brain, you're getting smarter, and it's just a good thing overall. And even if you look at reading for leisure as well, it's a lot better way of attaining dopamine than watching a quick YouTube short or a TikTok. You're spending brain energy focusing and concentrating, so it's more like you're earning the joy that comes from that form of entertainment. When you're reading, you have to take the time to imagine the stories that are being explained in the book. You have to envision it. It's difficult. It's not as easy as just seeing a video or like watching a TV show where everything's laid out in front of you. You don't really have to think. When you're reading, you have to envision the stories that are going on in the books. So you're earning your dopamine, you're earning that happiness. It's less superficial, and you're also usually learning something. Right now, I'm rereading Dune for fun, but within Dune, there's actually a lot of life lessons within that, and even philosophy and religious undertones. So I'm learning and I'm enjoying myself. And which leads me to how to get back into reading, because that's what this video is about. I'm talking about a few things that helped me. So about a year ago, I found myself in a situation that most of you have probably found yourselves in. It's so difficult to concentrate. You try to get back into reading, but you just can't sit for more than 10 minutes without closing your book and pulling up your phone. It's not easy. Getting back into reading after having been sort of stuck with technology for such a long time is a difficult thing to do. So I started these little steps to get me back into reading and to get my focus and concentration back to where I wanted it to be. And one of those things that I did was pretty simple, and I think something that can help you. So at work, I had a lot of downtime. There were a lot of moments where you'd go an hour without working. We'd kind of just be sitting around. You'd see everybody at work texting on their phones or scrolling through social media or watching videos or whatever. And I told myself, what can I do in this short amount of time? Or actually, it wasn't that short. It was like hours at times. What can I do in that amount of time to make myself better? I realized I could be reading during that time instead of mindlessly scrolling through social media. So that's exactly what I did. I brought a book with me wherever I went so that whenever I had downtime, instead of pulling out my phone, I could pull out a book. A lot of building good habits is finding a way to replace your bad habit. So if that bad habit, for example, is scrolling through social media, then you have to find a way to replace that habit with a good one. So first of all, what I did was I deleted the social media apps from my phone. Now, obviously, something like Instagram is good for being able to message your friends, for example. So what I did was, if I ever needed to use Instagram to message a friend, I would have to go on a computer and pull it up on my browser. That way it was a lot more difficult to just pull it out and scroll. And it's worked wonders for me. I don't have that problem anymore. I don't scroll through Instagram mindlessly. And obviously, once in a while, I have to post on the Warrior Philosopher Instagram, then I'll download Instagram for an hour and then I deleted it. And it's gotten to the point that I actually have Instagram on my phone again because it's not tempting. I've gone so long not needing that dopamine from scrolling, I just don't do it anymore. So I have the app. I'm only logged into the Warrior Philosopher account, so it might be a little bit harder and more tempting if I was logged into my personal account to scroll. But as of right now, with that account, I don't have that problem. So that's something I'm very happy with. So delete your social media apps. There goes my computer. Delete your social media apps from your phone. And if you have to still use it, then go on a web browser or download it for 30 minutes to make a post or something. Going off of that, like I said, you have to replace a bad habit with a good habit. This got a bad mechanism and replaced it with a good one. I was learning a lot of new things because I was using all this potentially bad time and turning it into something good, turning it into reading and learning. So that's what I did. I replaced a bad habit with a good habit. It's a very simple thing you can do. And I think something you should implement. You don't realize how much time you waste on your phone until you really start to replace that time with something beneficial, whether it be working out or reading or whatever, right? So that's something that's going to help a lot. Pick up a book whenever you want to pick up your phone. Another thing that I've done over time is I try to spread the amount of work that I'm putting into a book. So what I'll do is I generally will read either 2 books at a time, one of them being for leisure and one of them being for study. Like I said, I'm reading Dune right now. Well, when this video is uploaded, it's going to be 2 months in the future. But at the time I was reading Dune by Frank Herbert, which is a science fiction novel. And I was also reading Human All Too Human by Friedrich Nietzsche. So obviously Dune was for leisure and Human All Too Human was to learn from it. So one thing that's easy and one thing that's difficult, so you don't burn yourself out. You can also do this split by not reading 2 at the same time because that can be complicated for some people. What you can do is you can read one easy, nice, leisurely book and then do a hard book for study and then go back to a leisure book and then a book for study. And you go back and forth. And this way you don't burn yourself out. Now, specifically getting into reading philosophy, I'm going to suggest some things. Getting into philosophy, if you don't have any background knowledge, can seem a little bit daunting at first. And I'm going to be speaking from my perspective. It could be different from others. I'm going to talk about how I got into reading philosophy again, starting off with simple philosophy and getting into more complex stuff. So when I got back into philosophy, the first book that I reread, because I had read it before, was The Book of Five Rings by Miyamoto Musashi. And obviously, as many of you know, this channel kind of was started with Musashi content. So I picked up Book of Five Rings, reread it, and that was my way of getting back into philosophy. It was very simple, very deep and profound, however, but it was a simple read. I was also trying to read Plato's Republic at the time, which was a lot more difficult. So I definitely recommend starting off with something easy. I also read many of the Stoic classics, for example, Meditations, Marcus Aurelius, and then Letters from a Stoic by Seneca. And I actually recommend Letters from a Stoic by Seneca as opposed to Meditations by Marcus Aurelius because when you're reading Letters from a Stoic, because they are actual letters that Seneca was writing to his friends, it's almost like he's speaking to you. He's talking to you. He's teaching you directly. And I think that dynamic can be very helpful, especially if you're having a hard time getting back into reading. You could just read 1 letter a day and then ruminate and think about that letter throughout the day so that you really get a lot out of it. So I would recommend Letters from a Stoic, especially if you want to get into Stoicism as a good starter book. Now, obviously, going from that, I got into a whole lot of other things. I was reading some existentialist stuff by Camus. Obviously, I got into Friedrich Nietzsche, which has kind of been a big focus. And now I'm trying to diversify and get into some other philosophers inspired by Nietzsche. But I'd say with philosophy, you want to start off by first being able to read philosophy. be able to understand the simple books of philosophy, and then you can work your way up. Nietzsche is a little bit harder to read than some of the others. So if you want to get into Nietzsche, I would recommend starting off, for example, with Beyond Good and Evil, Birth of Tragedy, or like Genealogy of Morals. A lot of people try to get into Thus Spoke Zarathustra, which is kind of his most famous book, and find it incredibly difficult. It's his only sort of fictional book, and it's written in a very prosy style, very elegant writing, I would say, but that can be very difficult to read as well. So don't rush getting into philosophy. Start off with the basics. For me, the basics were sort of Eastern classics like Book of Five Rings, Art of War. And these are books I read before, and then going on to the Stoic classics, like I said, Meditations, Letters from a Stoic. You can get into Epictetus, Discourses, really good, or the Enchiridion. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff that you can get into, but start with the easy stuff when it comes to philosophy. And in regards to philosophy, there's also a lot of other subjects that can be helpful when getting into it. For example, history can be really good. When I was getting back into philosophy, I read Carroll Quigley's Evolution of Civilizations, and that was really helpful for giving me a background, especially since that particular history book was sort of trying to talk about cyclical patterns throughout history. And in doing that, you start to sort of see similarities with predictions philosophers make, such as Nietzsche, and it all kind of comes together. So if you get something out of this video, it's when you're trying to get back into reading, it's mainly about building that concentration and that focus. Don't rush. Don't do a really difficult book right away. Build your concentration and focus back up, and then you can start getting into the difficult stuff. And to get that concentration and focus, replace a bad habit with a good habit. Instead of playing a video game, pick up a book. Replace a moment where you're going to do something that's not beneficial and replace it with reading, right? You want to get that bad habit and replace it with a good habit. If you just try to get rid of a bad habit and you don't replace that time with anything, you're just sitting there in the moment that you'd be playing a video game, you're just staring at your screen blankly, just a blank screen, you're going to start playing video games again. But if you replace that time, instead you go outside, for example, and you pick up a book, or you go and you work out, you're going to replace that bad habit with a good habit. So that's how you rebuild that discipline to have that concentration and that focus. And it's going to work wonders for you. So that about sums up my advice about getting back into reading and why you should get back into reading. There's this quote, I forget who said it. It's like, the person who doesn't read lives once, but the man who reads lives 1,000 lives. And essentially it's that you can get all this experience that you might not be able to experience yourself. And it's important to experience things yourself, right? We talked about Nietzsche's writing in blood, and we've talked about Yukio Mishima's concept of living the physical reality. That's very important, but there's only so much that we ourselves can experience in the world. And what books give us is all this other experience from all these other people that we may not be able to experience. For example, you could be reading about somebody who went out into outer space, and maybe you can go out into outer space one day, and that's a great thing. But if that's not one of your goals, but you still want to know what it felt like, then you could read about someone who was an astronaut and went into outer space. So there's all these different lives that you can live without having to actually experience them. Obviously, we can't go back in time yet and like be a Roman legionary. We can't know what it was like to feel like Julius Caesar, but we can pick up Julius Caesar's conquest of Gaul and sort of get an idea of what it was like to be him. You can have all this experience that you might not be able to experience yourself now, and it could really enrich your view and understanding of life. And that's why reading is so important and why it is such a beautiful gift for us to be able to do so. And in this day and age, it's so easy to get your hands on pretty much any book in the world. Buy it on Amazon, or if you have a Kindle like me, you could buy it on your Kindle. There's so much you can do. Like, the internet is the modern Library of Alexandria, except anyone in the world with internet can access it. And that's such an amazing thing. We have so much to learn at our fingertips, and this is the time to enrich our brains. And instead of using technology for cheap dopamine and to make us sort of feel happy temporarily for that instant gratification, let's use the internet and technology for something good, to enrich our minds and make us greater. Seek that sort of overman ideal that Nietzsche talks about. But anyway, that about wraps up this video. I don't know where I am right now, but I'm probably not in this room. But anyway, as always, this is the Warrior Philosopher, building the foundations of the warrior philosophy. We'll see you next time.